Good morning. The show is Unfiltered. I'll bring you the latest headlines from across the continent of Africa, as well as some of the top stories that we have been covering and following up for you across the continent of Africa. A very good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you tuned in and joining us today. As usual, I'll start us off with the latest headlines from across the continent, and I'll start with those newspapers from Kenya. The Deadly Nation outrage. The insanity continued on the third day of anti-government protest led by Azimio la Umoja, One Kenya chief Raila Odinga, with journalists bearing the brand of police brutality. Several people were injured, businesses looted, and property of unknown value destroyed as protest degenerated into chaos. The story you'll find on page 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, as well as page 7 on the Daily Nation. And just beside that story related to the demos we saw yesterday, U.S. envoy's message. U.S. Senators Chris Coons and U.S. Ambassador Meg Whitman met DP Rigathi Gachagua and Azimio boss Raila Odinga in push for truce, but leaders stuck to their hardline positions. That is on page 4. Ruto's position. President William Ruto has committed to respect the constitution and uphold the rule of law, even as opposition leader Raila Odinga persists with anti-government protest. That is on page 3. Counting losses, a cruise ship destined for the port of Mombasa changed course to Tanzania. The MVC Bon Sojourn, sailing from Mahi, Seychelles, with 800 tourists, will now dock in Tanzania for 6 days. And I guess that has been brought about by the demonstrations, that sometimes can equate to instability in a country. So I guess it's not working for the better good of the economy. All right, so let's Kilifi, Kwale, Kajiado to get a lion's share. That is, Kwale, Kilifi and Kajiado will receive the lion's share of the 2.9 billion Kenya shillings mining proceeds held in treasury. Since 2016, the amount is 20% of all royalties collected by the ministry since 2016. 14.7 billion Kenya shillings is the money. Why investing in DRC makes sense? And I was reading this story yesterday. Okay, I see it's here on page 10. So I'll see if I remember, then we can just look at a bit of that story and see what it is about. And 14 people killed in Naivasha varsity bus and matatu crash. That is on page 10 on the Daily Nation. UDA touched in bloody Azimio demos. That is the main headline on the Star newspaper this morning. Revealed mess in mega power projects as 100 billion Kenya shillings at risk. I think that is the latest report by the Auditor General, Nancy Gathungu there, and the main pictorial of an NTV video journalist, Eric Asinta, and a colleague who were attacked by goons during the Azimio protest in Pipeline, Nairobi yesterday. And just below that, fires on Outer Ring Road in Nairobi during Azimio protest on Thursday. Okay, the Standard newspaper, protest chaos amid frantic calls for talks. At least one shot, several injured, journalist hurt as police battled protesters. UDA office torched, businesses paralyzed amid looting in parts of Nairobi, Kisumu. Raila vows to press on, president jets back, keeps off Azimio demands at Investors Forum. Pressure piles for talks. That story is on page 4, 5, 6, and 7. 14 killed in horror bus matatu crash. That is also there. Ruto's Hill, 65 billion Kenya shillings Moderna plant deal for Kenya. That story is on page 10, and I think talks about this plant had started sometimes back last year, but the current President William Ruto has been able to seal that deal. So I guess that is a plus for the country. Now, who will succeed CBK governor? That story is on page 40. And then we do have some news there on sports, which I will look at very shortly. Let's look at some other newspapers from across the continent. The New Times from Rwanda. What next after government scrapes Obodehe categories? The categories were first introduced by government in 2000 as part of the strategic to address poverty reduction. All right, so this Obodehe, if I'm not wrong, because I think I watched a documentary about this. It's a sort of a grassroots governing structure that involves the people. So what happens? I think it also happens in Burundi, and this is just one of the key things that have helped Rwanda rebuild after that 1994 genocide, where sort of there are committees set up in the villages or something like that, where, and I think this is one of the suggestions I've made here when we used to talk about a few years ago, maybe as we look at how counties can be more functional, but anyway, that aside. So they form these committees in the villages, and then representatives from sub-villages or whatever the setting is there in Rwanda, they come with the urgent needs which they feel that the people would like, or on behalf of the people. So when they meet in these committees, so it's easier for the government to have a targeted development agenda. So when these heads of village elders or whatever it is come to these meetings, they're saying, in such and such a village where I represent, our immediate need right now will be a bridge. In such and such a village where I represent, our immediate need now will be to have more water wells or boreholes or things like that. So this has really helped in terms of addressing the issue of poverty and things like that in Rwanda, as Burundi has also tried that, but it has not been successful. Burundi has not been one of the stable countries in Africa. It's still struggling with its stability. The instability there is not as loud as we see in other areas, but it is still struggling with instability. But it also tried this kind of governorship, or this kind of a model that helps in fighting poverty, as well as just addressing the day-to-day issues that affect the people from the grassroots. So it has proved to be successful. So that's why the New Times is asking now, what next after government scrapes Obudehe categories? So I hope I've been able to have us understand just a little bit of that. And I wonder why the government of Rwanda wants to scrape that. The Daily Monitor from Uganda: ministers disown Kitutu on iron sheets scandal. New details show dozens of lawmakers alongside priests, ministers and churches were listed as likely iron sheets beneficiaries, despite reportedly taking home nothing. Some 3,000 pieces were allegedly offloaded at the home of a minister's son near Kampala. It's just one of those scandals. It's just a gift that keeps on giving. It has refused to go away, this iron sheet scandal in Uganda, and I think it will go down with a lot of key government officials there. Now, speed up works on money printing factory, says MPs. Security issues guidelines on school attacks. Okay, very well. And then the Citizen, this one from Tanzania. U.S. pledges more support for Tanzania's development. $560 million in bilateral assistance in the next financial year is among pledges made by the U.S. as part of efforts to foster relations. And then what next, as an opposed poll winner declared unconstitutional? Okay, not really. Daily News from Zimbabwe: ZANU-PF bids to quell opposition as stamping for 2023 polls gather pace. Second gold mafia episode telecast, and I think I spent my 55 minutes that I probably will not get again watching it last night after the release, because this has been trending, so I really wanted to know what has been happening. I was late to the party. I think even the first episode, I watched it yesterday. Well, I think it's the word against the government of Zimbabwe and those who have been mentioned adversely in that report. So I'll just leave that there. The Newsday also from Zimbabwe: gold mafia angel orders attack on critics, as another expose airs. That is like the super diplomat for Zimbabwe. That angel, he's also a prophet. I don't know. He calls himself man of God, but go watch that. It's quite an interesting piece. CCC sets date for candidates selection. All right, and ED demands rerun in violence hotspots. The Herald as well from Zimbabwe: church lauded for cultivating peace. I guess the church in Zimbabwe is doing fantastic. So they've been lauded for cultivating peace, and that is what church has always been known for, and that is what the church should always be known for. But, church is finding itself in very difficult positions as far as politics in the different countries are concerned. But I'm glad that it looks like the church in Zimbabwe is seems to be doing the right thing, whatever that is. New policy on bullying drugs coming. The Nation from Nigeria, Sergei Agbakoba Falana, interim government unknown, Tulum, legal giants seek trial of plotters, Lalong, interim government schemers, daydreaming. And then public debts now 45 trillion naira, says DMO. And CCB begins a probe of Keyamo's anti-graft petition against Atiku. And then APC US condemns anti-Atinibu protest. PDP lifts suspension of Anyim Fayose. UBA delivers 201 billion naira full year profit. I think one of the leading banks in Nigeria. First Bank OK's name change and UK Africa subsidiaries. All right. The Daily Trust as well. This is from Nigeria. Still, Labour cautions federal government on petrol subsidy removal. Nigerians worried over unclear palliative plan. Cost of living to rise by 200%. That is according to experts. Like, that's the last thing you want to hear. Cost of living to rise by 200%. Do you even know what that means to the citizens? This is in Nigeria, a country that is already battered so much, and inflation is high, not just in Nigeria, but around the world, and especially in Africa. So when you hear that, as much as the cost of living is already high, there are chances that it will get worse and it will rise by 200%. It's going to be a very rocky ride there for Nigerians. So you better tough, belt up and get ready for that bumpy ride there. And Gote leased 300 billion naira record bonds on NGX. PDP reverses suspension of Anyim Fayose Shema after Ayu's exit. And then Nigeria's debt rose to 46.25 trillion naira in 2022. This is from Nigeria as well. Agbagoba, no constitutional provision for interim government. It is nonsense. It is an idea not foreseeable under Buhari, says Lalong. CD dismisses it as unwarranted, unnecessary, subversive. DSS report is fake. Plot to arrest Atiku, Obi alleges Frank. Okay. Full year 2022, UBA delivers strong results as profits hits 201 billion naira. Very well. So those are some of the papers from Africa. Let me see if I can have others from what do you call it? I don't think I have those from the UK. I don't have them with me this morning. That's all right. We shall just move on and look at some of these news items in detail, since we're looking at the top stories in Africa this morning. Before I get into the sports, to the other news making headlines across Africa, let me just bring us the sports news as it has been covered by some of our papers here in Kenya. The back page of the Standard newspaper. Can Man City's Holland become Europe's most prolific player? Records kept tumbling as the Norwegian continues to score goals at will in both the EPL and Champions League. Manchester City striker has scored 28 goals in 27 English Premier League outings so far this season. So that story is there. I'll not get into the details of that. And then in tennis, Christie stuns Sabalenka to reach Miami Open semi. That is on what do you call it? On tennis matches. Gor win earns Ojwang millions. Stephen Ojwang's first ever winning bet was on his favorite club Gor Mahia months ago. Last Saturday, his lucky star rose again as he triumphed in the Sports Pesa midweek jackpot to win 23 million Kenyan shillings. Okay, good for Ojwang, I guess. Athletes pour cold water on fight against doping menace. Still on the Kenya sporting scene, athletes and coaches want fight against doping to save Kenya from a ban. Some athletes want whistleblower system to ease reporting of suspected cheats. What do you mean ease reporting on suspected cheats? Why are you cheating in the first place? Look here, Kenya. You cannot seek to change these rules. What you need to do is stay away from, and a lot of times it's not even drugs, it's perhaps people take even medicine for certain ailments. And these medicines, part of the component that makes up these medicines, are banned, are considered to be enhancement drugs. So sometimes it's not necessarily them going out of their way and having this what do you call it, enhancement drugs, And so now they're saying some athletes want the whistleblower system to ease reporting of suspect. Why? Well, you don't want if. Oh, Kenyans. It has now come down to desperate times for Kenyan athletes today. Head of the Athletics Integrity Unit, AIU, Brett Clothier, is meeting Sports Cabinet Secretary Ababu Namwamba after 5-day fact-finding mission, and the renewed anti-doping war is likely to be top of the agenda. Clothier has been in the country since Monday for a fact-finding mission, which saw him listen to athletes and their support personnel in interactive forums organized by Athletics Kenya to find ways of dealing with doping, a menace that has in recent years ruined Kenya's reputation as the powerhouse of the sport. During the meetings held in Eldoret, Kapsabet, and Iten from Tuesday, the AIU Chief Executive Officer was candidly told how a combination of ignorance, dishonesty, and desire to win millions of prize monies was plunging the country into the abyss of doping. Are you now confessing? Now, more than 1,000 athletes attended the Iten Forum on Wednesday evening. Clothier was accompanied by AK President Jack Tuwei and the Federation's Nairobi Chairman Barnaba Korir. The following are some of the questions that linger as AIU and Athletics Kenya and the Anti-Doping Agency of Kenya meet CS Namwamba over the menace. Okay, so one of the questions, I think this is important. How will Kenya change tack in the fight against doping? And then that has been answered and all that. So I think, Kenyan athletes can run. They've been running. They've been winning this. Let them just keep on to whatever they've been doing, the traditional foods and the hard work and the training. That's enough. That's how you've been winning these things since time immemorial. So, you can't be that ignorant to know that you'll be caught if you engage in things that are not proper, And the fact that Kenya has been winning, there has been a lot of international campaign to try to, paint Kenya in a bad light. So I'm just hoping that our athletes will be careful and just not do things that might jeopardize their careers, because winning, you can win without any other monkey business involved. Okay, let me see what the Nation has covered in its sports pages. We have time. Let me see what I can get us here. Leopards wary of little-known Muranga Seals. That is the AFC Leopards. And then Mwendwa set to return to the helm of Kenya football. Football stakeholders now want Sports Cabinet Secretary Ababu Namwamba to make public the details of the agreement with FIFA that led to the World Football Body lifting Kenya's international suspension. They also want to know if the deal included Nick Mwendwa returning to the head of the Football Federation of Kenya. Okay, that is also there now. All right, I think that is just about it. Do we have some sports on the Star newspaper? Mutai's vision: new KRU boss backs Shujaa to survive the World Rugby Series. Kenya Rugby had their official elections, the election of the officials. Was it yesterday or the other day? And I think it was headed by IBC. And IBC seems to have done a very fantastic job. We've not had any appeals brought about. Nobody questioned the procedure, the electoral procedure. So, IBC did well. I don't know, did they have the quorum, the IBC, to conduct these rugby elections? But I guess that is on the elections, the other elections, not the rugby elections. So they do have their new officials there. Man on a mission, Crystal Palace manager Roy Hagson says he has never felt old enough to retire as he prepares to return to the dugout on Saturday. The 75-year-old is already the Premier League's oldest manager from his spell at Watford last year. Okay. Tricky encounter, BVB supporters hopeful ahead of this weekend's Der Klassiker. Two hearts might beat in the chest of Borussia Dortmund's fans ahead of the delicate league encounter against Bayern Munich on Saturday evening. So there you go. And then La Liga action returns as leaders. Barcelona travel to bottom side Elche tomorrow. And former Spain boss Enrique keen on Premier League. And then Formula One of my other favorite sports. Mercedes could take a long time to match Red Bull. I guess by Lewis Hamilton having joined Mercedes, has not been doing very well, but there you go. I guess you're now up to date with the latest on the papers there. So now let me bring us some detailed news, and then we can choose which ones to talk about, because we have a lot of talking to do this morning. We start with some news from the Catholic Church. And the Catholic Church has formally rejected a 15th century doctrine of discovery used to justify European colonization of Africa and the Americas. The doctrine, which was based on decrees set out on the so-called papal bulls, was legally invoked by Europeans who discovered new lands and often violently seized it from the indigenous people. But in a statement on Thursday, the Vatican said the doctrine was not part of the teaching of the Catholic Church, even as it still informs current state policies and laws. Historical research clearly demonstrates that the papal documents in question, written in a specific historic period and linked to political questions, have never been considered expressions of the Catholic faith, it said. The Vatican said the Catholic Church was acknowledging that the papal edicts did not reflect the equal dignity and rights of the indigenous people. It said that it was aware the documents were manipulated for political purposes by colonial powers to justify immoral acts. It said they were at times done without opposition from ecclesiastical authorities. It is only just to recognize these errors, to acknowledge the terrible effects of the assimilation policies and the pain experienced by indigenous peoples, and ask for pardon, it said. Well, I have so much to say about this story, and I will, but let's move on to other stories first, and then we'll come back to it. And we go to Tanzania. U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris has lauded Tanzania's reforms aimed at strengthening the East African nation's democracy. Her host, President Samia Suluhu Hassan, described the visit as a milestone for her country. Ms. Harris is in the second leg of her African tour, which began in Ghana and will conclude in Zambia over the weekend. With colorful traditional dances, Tanzanians welcomed Ms. Harris to their country. Buses in the seaside city of Dar es Salaam were draped in her pictures. It is a rare visit by a senior American official. Many see it as an endorsement of President Samia's reforms. Since taking over the controversial John Magufuli, who died 2 years ago, she has lifted a ban on opposition rallies and encouraged press freedom. Exiled politicians have returned home. Ms. Harris described the decisions as important and meaningful steps that have helped expand the two countries' partnership. She announced a $560 million support to boost trade with Tanzania and strengthen democracy. And then the story that I've been keeping you up to date with from Senegal. Opposition leader and presidential aspirant Ousmane Sonko on Thursday received a 2-month suspended prison sentence for libel in a case involving the country's tourism ministry head. The minister's lawyer El Hadji Diop said the sentence will not prevent him from running in elections next year. An apparent effort by authorities to defuse a standoff with his supporters, who have repeatedly taken to the streets to denounce what they say is a politically motivated campaign. Sonko, who is 48, was charged with libel for accusing the tourism minister of embezzlement. He denied wrongdoing and previously said the charges against him were attacked to eliminate him from the presidential race. The government has denied these accusations. The libel trial and another separate sexual abuse case in which Sonko is charged with have spurred violent protests across the country. Sonko has also denied wrongdoing in the sexual abuse case. He called for nationwide protests on Wednesday and Thursday, the day the libel case was set to resume, as well as on April the 3rd. These sporadic, sometimes violent demonstrations have taken place over the past 2 years in support of Sonko, who has become the focus of anger at President Macky Sall's failure to rule out running for a third term in elections next year. Authorities have since banned most planned protests in Dakar and dispersed gatherings with tear gas as well as stun grenades, including the latest on Wednesday. Sonko and his supporters say Sall, who is 61 years old, is using the trials to eliminate competition ahead of the polls. Some of Sall's other opponents faced judicial proceedings in the run-up to the last elections in 2019 and as a result were unable to run against him. Sonko, who came third in 2019, has clout among Senegal's disenfranchised urban youth frustrated by joblessness and poor economic prospects. Anger has also risen around fears Sall will use a recent change to the constitution to reset his mandate, which ends in 2024, allowing him to run for a third term. Sall has shirked all questions about this, neither confirming nor denying any of these claims. And then we go to Burundi, and President Evariste Ndayishimiye on Tuesday called on lawmakers at the East African Legislative Assembly EALA to find ways of engaging with the youth more for regional integration. He spoke while addressing the EALA in Bujumbura. During the first meeting of the Fifth Assembly of the regional legislators, the Burundi president said the community cannot develop without fronting the youth. Ndayishimiye, who is the current EAC chairperson, said there is need for more outreach programs that should especially target the youth in the region. In February, the Burundi president was appointed the African Union chairman for the Youth and Security Agenda. Currently, the region has adopted mechanisms to empower the youth in the region, including the election of youth ambassadors in every partner state and the introduction of the East African Youth Parliament. Head over to Ethiopia, and prosecutors in Ethiopia say they are dropping criminal charges placed against senior civil and military leaders from the Tigray People's Liberation Front, TPLF. This is the latest move following a peace deal signed last year to end one of Africa's deadliest conflicts between the TPLF and the government. A statement by the Ministry of Justice said on Thursday that conflict-related cases would be seen in the context of transitional justice. In July 2021, more than 60 senior TPLF figures, including its leader Debretsion Gebremichael and Getachew Reda, now appointed interim head of the Tigray region, were charged with terrorism. Institutions linked with the organization were also charged since the agreement was reached. The federal government and Tigray fighters last year, relative peace has returned to northern Ethiopia after 2 years of bloodshed. And the latest from Sudan is that protesters in Sudan have planned several large gatherings over the next few weeks to push for a fully civilian government, according to local media. An agreement between the country's military leaders and some civilian groups is expected soon, and possibly the announcement of a new civilian government to oversee the country until elections are held. For the protesters, the future role of the army, which overthrew an interim government in October 2021, is critical. After a long time, President Omar al-Bashir, or rather, former leader Omar al-Bashir, was overthrown in 2019. Civil groups and the military shared power for a couple of years, and that has since changed. So now the civilians are saying they don't trust even the latest agreement that was signed in December, and that's why they feel they have to keep putting pressure on the government to see that they stick to that agreement. We head over to Nigeria, and secret police have warned against an alleged plot being hatched by misguided politicians to put in place an interim government after 29th of May, when President Muhammadu Buhari leaves office and hands power to President Bola Tinubu. On Wednesday, the Department of State Services warned that it will do everything in its power to stop the plan, and it was unconstitutional and punishable by death, local media reported. DSS spokesperson Peter Funanya said the department had identified those behind the scheme to thwart democracy. Mr. Funanya said the planners wanted to sponsor endless violent mass protests in major cities to warrant a declaration of a state of emergency, and also obtain frivolous court injunctions to delay the presidential, legislative and state-level inaugurations. Earlier, Mr. Tinubu had raised the alarm over a plot by some aggrieved partisans to truncate the transitional process. However, opposition politicians say the DSS warning is intended to intimidate Nigerians and prevent them from seeking judicial redress over the disputed February 25th polls. We head over now to Cote d'Ivoire, and the former Ivorian President Henry Konan Bedie, now an opponent, on Thursday called on his party members to unite to win the next presidential elections in 2025 after the defection of some leaders in recent times. The call for unity echoes the defections in recent weeks of some PDCI leaders, such as Mr. Bedie's former chief of staff, Naksi Ndri, who joined the ruling party. The 88-year-old ex-president also hinted that alliances could be forged with other parties for the next elections. Several opposition figures were seated in the front row, leaders of the party of another former President Laurent Gbagbo, former First Lady Simone Gbagbo, or Charles Blegold. In his speech, Henry Konan Bedie also made a harsh assessment of Cote d'Ivoire, and Mr. Bedie, however, assured to reach out to President Alassane Ouattara to engage in a frank and sincere dialogue for the benefit of a lasting peace. Municipal and regional elections are to be held in September 2023. The next presidential elections will take place in 2025. Henry Konan Bedie, who governed Cote d'Ivoire from 1993 to 1999, does not rule out being the PDCI's candidate in this election. He will then be 91 years old. Selfish old man. Other party members, that was not part of the news, but other party members of his party have also expressed their willingness to enter the presidential race, such as former Trade Minister Jean-Louis Billon. On Thursday, Mr. Bedie was named as the sole candidate to succeed him as PDCI president at the party's next Congress in June. The PDCI, a former single party, was in power from 1960 when Cote d'Ivoire gained independence in 1999. Once an ally of President Alassane Ouattara, elected in 2010, he has returned to the opposition since 2018, where he has become closer to the supporters of Laurent Gbagbo. Something fishy seems to be cooking there in Cote d'Ivoire. We can't trust that. We end our news from Nigeria by going back to Nigeria, and furious over the Nigerian military raid that killed 41 fighters on March 19th, Islamic State West African province ISWAP commander has executed his deputy for failing to stop the attack. Deputy ISWAP commander Abu Dada was on Monday executed by his boss Abu Muhammad in the presence of other fighters in Kajeri Dogumbu village in Mafa local government area of northeast Borno State. Abu Muhammad said he was mostly hurt because the Nigerian forces killed scores of his fighters, banned foodstuffs and some newly acquired furniture meant for his wedding. He was also enraged by the attack that led to the seizure of their only 3 gun trucks. Nigerian troops attacked an ISWAP hideout in Makdolo in Dekwa, LGA of Borno State, killing 41 insurgents, together with one of their commander, Abu Zahra, as many injured extremists fled during the attack. The troops carried out the attack on the platform of Operation Hadin Kai in collaboration with the Civilian Joint Task Force CGTF and were coordinated by Major General Shaibu Waidi. You're now up to date. Now. So ISWAP leader executed his deputy because he failed to stop the attacks that was carried out by the Nigerian military that claimed 41 of the ISWAP fighters. But what I find to be interesting about this story is the fact that what really annoyed this ISWAP leader is that the Nigerian forces attacked some of the preparations, part of the preparations, the banned foodstuffs, and of course killing his fighters, and they also banned his newly acquired furniture that was meant for his wedding. So this is a terrorist group, right? And they're situated somewhere in Borno State, and the government has been unable to apprehend these people. But they seem to be living a very normal life. This ISWAP leader was getting ready to have a wedding. Matter of fact, he had even bought new furniture. Government of Nigeria, you mean to tell us you really can't locate where ISWAP is or where Boko Haram is? For us to even get such a detailed news from where this ISOP is located, and for us to keep getting detailed news from where Boko Haram is located and the activities and what is happening there, that should tell us that indeed it's not that difficult to gain access to where these criminals are, these terrorists are located. This person was preparing to have a wedding and had acquired new furniture, but for some reason, the Nigerian government forces somehow got to get wind of where they are. They killed about 41 fighters of ISWAP, and of course the ISWAP leader was really mad. So what he decided to do is murder his deputy in front of other fighters. And we can get this detailed information about ISWAP leader, and the government of Nigeria does not have intelligence to get a hold of these criminals that are terrorizing Nigerians. This is what I fail to understand every now and then. Is it because the government of Nigeria is not really interested after going, after these criminals? I think at this point you can't even hold President Muhammadu Buhari accountable anymore, because how he has been handling the issues of security in Nigeria has been wanting, and he showed very little commitment in trying to really handle that issue. So I think now Nigerians' hopes are pegged on the new administration. That now also, from the stories that we're hearing, it appears also might be having a bit of a problem. It's quite nuts that we all know that Al-Shabaab in this country, or somewhere in northeastern province, I can't compare the activities of Al-Shabaab in Kenya and the activities of Al-Shabaab in Somalia. In Somalia, they're many, and they're taking over some critical villages and towns. But even with that, and the lack of proper capabilities from Somalia's government, we've still seen some good effort being made and some advances being made in the fight against Al-Shabaab. But I can't imagine, like our country here, Al-Shabaab is somewhere in northeastern Kenya. That's where they normally are, in the Kenyan north. And then we get details. The government shares with us details that, Al-Shabaab, the leader there, was even planning for a wedding. And the government did not even raid the camp. But the leader there was very mad because the foodstuffs and all the plannings he had been making and the new furniture he had acquired for his wedding were all ruined. So he got so annoyed that he killed his deputy, and then that will be a news flash in our television stations or in our newspapers, and that will be that. No, that cannot be that. So by the time we're able to get this detailed information about the activities of ISWAP, about the activities of Boko Haram, surely it is easy to get a hold of these groups. It is easy. If Nigerian government meant business, it could bring to book these criminal extremist groups that have been causing mayhem and a lot of insecurity in Nigeria. But this goes to show you the lack of commitment that has been very perverse in the way the Nigerian government has been handling this issue of security or lack thereof in Nigeria. So this is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. So the ISOP leader executed his deputy over that. Now, speaking of Nigeria, let's just get down with Nigeria. Nigeria's secret police have warned against an alleged plot being hatched by misguided politicians to put in place an interim government. Okay, because I've heard jokes about this, but now if it is an intelligence report from the Nigerian secret police, then this is something worrying, because there have been some jokes running around that the president-elect is not fully capable of handling the affairs of Nigeria or running, his responsibilities as the head of state. Because of whatever reason, I think illness, I think age, or whatever it is, I don't know. These are all allegations, right? So therefore, he's been chosen there and put in place. That's why he was picked, because according to some people, he might not even last long, so that his deputy might take over, or so that he could be used as a puppet because he can't really be fully responsible for whatever reasons or explanations that people are giving. So that's why APC, the ruling party, thought it was a good idea to put Tinubu there, because I think it will be easy for some elements in that party to run the agenda through his administration, because of he will not be fully capable. Now, these are allegations, and these are not my words, but these have been the conversations that have been making rounds. And I thought, that's, people will just talk. It's really not a big deal. But now, that the Nigerian secret police have warned against an alleged plot being hatched by what they term misguided politicians to put in place an interim government after the 29th May. So after the swearing in, they're saying there's no way Tinubu is going to run this country properly, so we better have an alternative government. So these misguided politicians are planning to have an alternative government. I think this is what is. So they're planning to have an interim government after 29th of March, when President Buhari leaves office and hands over power to President Bola Tinubu. So what they're planning to do is have an alternative government and help President Tinubu lead the country from the other side. I don't know what side that is. I have no idea. Now, on Wednesday, the Department of State Services warned that it will do everything in its power to stop the plan, which it said was unconstitutional and punishable by death. So what I need to understand, because I really don't know the meats and the depths of this story, these politicians, are they from the opposition parties? Because the opposition is in court challenging Tinubu's win. Or these politicians, are they in the ruling party, the APC party? These misguided politicians, in quotes, where are they? Which part are they allied to? The ruling party or the opposition? I think I need to know that. Now, on Wednesday, the Department of State Services, as I said they will do everything to stop the plan. The DSS spokesperson Peter Funanya said the department had identified those behind the scheme to thwart democracy. Mr. Funanya said the planners wanted to sponsor endless violent mass protest in major cities to warrant a declaration of state of emergency. So this sounds like the opposition. And also obtain frivolous court injunctions to delay the presidential, legislative and state level inaugurations. Earlier, Mr. Tinubu had raised the alarm over a plot by some aggrieved partisans to truncate the transitional process to stop. And however, opposition politicians say the DSS warning is intended to intimidate Nigerians and prevent them from seeking judicial redress over the disputed 25th February polls. Okay, so I guess I shall be seeking to see how this story will go ahead. Hopefully, there will be nobody who is looking to truncate, to abort that process. But it's interesting. It's interesting that even before the president-elect is sworn in, there are already some politicians who already started setting up an interim government, an alternative government for Nigerians. I don't know what that will look like or what they'll be serving. We do have a shadow government from the opposition, but I guess this is not what they're referring to. This is just another government, but being run parallel to the official government, which it is against the constitution. So, okay, I hope this story has no basis. That is my hope, because things like that can really work to upset the stability of a country. So if the courts in Nigeria rule to say that Tinubu was duly elected, and that should be that, if there are other means and ways through the law that you could still seek redress, then you follow that. Because things like this have the capabilities of really destabilizing a country. Now back to Cote d'Ivoire. I don't know, man. This former president already was president, Henry Konan Bedi. He was already a president in Cote d'Ivoire. He was president from 1993 to 1999. I guess that was not good enough for him. And right now he is 81. Let me see his age. I guess he's 85, 86. So he's a pretty He's someone who's really God has blessed with long life. hmm He's 88. He's 88. So you know what that means? That means him and Bia right now are having their mid-morning nap. That's what is happening right now. Okay? So he's 88, and at 88, he still has ambitions of running for the presidency in Cote d'Ivoire come the year 2026. I think that is the next, 2025, right? So in 2025, he will be 90 years old. He'll be 91, actually. He will be 91 years old. I think this is very selfish of this former president, Henry Konan Bedi. This is very, very selfish. And this selfish older statesman in Africa should just stop it, especially if you've had already an opportunity to serve your country. What is it that you want to do now at 88, or is it you're looking to do at 91 should you be elected, that you did not get a chance to do when you're much younger in the early 90s and you know, in the 90s really, because he was there from 1993 to 1999 basically, much part of the 90s. He was the president in Cote d'Ivoire. What is it that you want to do now that you couldn't do then? You had an opportunity to serve the Ivorians. You want to come back at the age of 91, you want to run again and serve who? You're going to spend much of your time, I can't even, you know, I don't want to be disrespectful to age. I think age is something to be celebrated because even at 88, I think it is such a blessing that he's still there and he still has a sound mind. But for him to think that he wants to run at the age of 99, 91, I don't know if he has a sound mind, because if he was wise enough at his age, then he would know this is not a good idea at all. And I doubt this is what Ivorians want. So he's joining forces with Gbagbo, and he's banking on that support that Laurent Gbagbo has, because he seems to be enjoying support from Laurent Gbagbo's supporters, who also is a former president of Ivory Coast, who was voted out, decided to stick in power. That sparked a civil war. That saw him being taken out by soldiers from ECOWAS. And then he left. He was taken to the ICC. He was cleared. So since he came back, he tries to be very careful. He tries to be very careful with his political stance, his sentiments in public and things like that. I think he learned a good lesson while he was at the ICC. But he still harbors ambitions of wanting to run for presidency. Laurent Gbagbo, you had your chance. The people didn't want you. I think you must, as a wise person, as much as for Laurent Gbagbo, he's a bit younger, so, but as much as he still can run, and nothing, I hope nothing in the constitution of Ivory Coast bars him from running. Although I think after those events that led to that civil war, he should not be allowed to run. But just in case there is a constitutional allowance that allows him to run in Cote d'Ivoire, a wise person would know this is not something to go for again. You're supposed to have gone to the ICC, came back with a different mindset and say, you know, I still feel like I need to serve the people of Ivory Coast, but I don't have to necessarily be a president to serve them in whatever capacity. You could still serve the people of Ivory Coast, not as a president. You could still serve them, you know, from different spaces, still render your service if you feel they need them so much and, you know, they must have them. You could still find other positions to serve the people of Ivory Coast. But the idea of you even wanting to come back and run again after that what happened, I think it's quite unwise. Same as former President Henry Konan Bedi. If at all he evens, I hope this is just an idea that he does not plan to pursue. But if he plans to run, and by the time he shall be running, he'll be 91. First of all, this is very selfish. This is very selfish of him. It is selfish in the sense that at 91, there's nothing much you can do. At 91, you're not at the optimum. You're incapable. because of age and other factors, you are incapacitated in some way. You can't fully function as a head of state. So stop. It's a bad idea. Somebody tell him to stop. One of his grandkids, perhaps should come and tell him, no, Grandpa, you need to just chill out with us and, look at the birds in the morning chirping and just enjoy the breeze in the evening. Enjoy, your relaxation in between that. And that's it, because you already had an opportunity to serve your country. But this idea of coming back and with your age and insisting that you must be in power. Look at, your age mates like Paul Biya. I guess he's the same age. Paul Biya turned 90. Look at him. The guy can't even. Have you seen him in public? Have you seen him representing Cameroon in international events? He can't get a hold of himself. It's even embarrassing to even sit here and talk about it out of respect, for his age. But unfortunately, we have to talk about it because he has refused to leave office. As incapacitated as he is, he still insists on being there. But I think this is his wife's idea, Chantal. Chantal is still young and cute, and she still wants to enjoy, the traps of power. And, as long as the husband is still the president, she'll be there. She'll be there holding his arm and taking him in these events. And after President Paul Biya arrives, the first thing he does is look for a very comfortable position and his eyes go to rest. I don't want to say he goes to sleep, but he rests his eyes every now and then. In fact, every so often in these events, because he can't. He's not even supposed to be there. So stop insisting. So even for this former Ivorian president, Henry Konan Padi, I hope this is just a thought or a joke that you made with your friends that should not be taken seriously and should not be pursued. A wise person should know when to stop. And this goes for you, and this goes to former President Laurent Gbagbo, especially for Laurent Gbagbo, because of the history and what happened when he was being removed in power, or when he was defeated and he refused to move to get himself out of the State House, and what transpired after that. I think should he decide to run for presidency and start these charged campaigns, I think it will not be very good for Ivory Coast. So sometimes the country has to be bigger than our personal ambitions. Who am I preaching to? African leaders? In an ideal world, that will be the right thing to do. But, it's interesting. You see very young leaders like the New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda, that's her name, Ardern, who said she did not have any more fuel in her tank, and she could not serve her country to capacity as she would have wished. She was experiencing a burnout, and she was very honest about it, and she left. And how old is she? She's not even 45. She's very young, and they're leaving. And these developed countries, you don't have to die there. You don't have to die there. You leave, and a wise leader knows when to leave the stage. And if you really must serve, look for other works to do. I'm sure you will be given a goodwill ambassador to whatever. You will still serve your people. You don't have to be the president to serve. You don't have to have a title to serve. Leaders serve in whatever capacity they find themselves. As long as you have that leadership calling in you, you don't need a title to serve. But we don't have leaders here. I guess that's why we see people who are just greedy, and who thinks too much of themselves, who are too full of themselves that they can't imagine anybody else leading other than them. That's why you see these problems we are seeing as far as the leadership vacuum in Africa is concerned. And that is a very sad thing. Now, Ethiopia, they continue with the progress that they've been making as far as the mediation process and the conflict that happened for 2 years there is concerned. And the Tigray leaders, the TPLF leaders, had already been sanctioned as terrorists, but these charges have been dropped. The TPLF had also been removed from that list of terrorist groups. It was designated as a terrorist group after the war started. I think in 2021, when senior TPLF figures, including the leader, Debretsion Gebremichael and Getachew Rada, who is the spokesperson of TPLF. They were designated as terrorists, and TPLF designated as a terrorist organization. So these charges have been dropped, which I think is also another step towards finding a lasting solution, peace in Ethiopia. There's some news that happened. I think when we were talking last about this story, I forgot to bring in a very important development. I don't know if I can remember the full details. I was just reading about it after we were done with that conversation. The last I was telling you about the developments that are, and the changes that are being made, and in respect to that agreement that happened in November, and the mediation process, which I think is moving towards a positive side of it. So that's a good thing. But there's something that happened, I think, sometimes back last week, and the government of Ethiopia, I think, stopped the whole process that had already been initiated by the United Nations investigators to try to investigate and bring to book and compile a report over that conflict. So that process has been has been aborted completely. It's gone. So we will not hear what what really happened in Tigray. We will not get to know what really happened. And so I don't know if this was an agreement between the TPLF and the government as well, and other actors that are involved in this conflict. And I don't know if it is the right thing for Ethiopia. I think the last time I attempted to talk to you about perhaps this restorative justice could be what the Ethiopian government is going for, where you find ways of correcting the harm that was caused without necessarily taking anybody to jail, having anybody answerable. Well, that could be good, but also, on the other hand, it sets a very bad precedence where people leaders in this continent will want to engage in these kinds of wars and human rights abuses because they know they can easily take that route of find as a conflict management solution or strategy, and escape responsibilities. I think that is the danger of taking that route. But otherwise, it seems to be fitting well within the context of Ethiopia because of who and the people that were involved in this conflict. And if we are to go fully and try to get people responsible, then the buck stops with key people in Ethiopia. And I don't know if that will work towards having a more united Ethiopia or dividing the country further. So they seem to have chosen that route, and it could be good, but also it has the downside of it, that is a very dangerous precedence being set there in Ethiopia. Ethiopia is an important country in this continent, more so because it does host our headquarters for African Union, and it is a very important player and actor in the African politics and geopolitics, and even in the world politics. It's a very important player. So whatever he does, there are some countries who are just sitting and watching and seeing, let's wait and see if the leadership of Ethiopia or the people who are involved in this 2-year-long conflict will get away, how this will be treated, and how the international system will treat this conflict, and some of the repercussions, if any, that will be given towards the actors of this conflict. But I think surprise to many that even countries that you would think would highly sanction Ethiopia, would highly be speaking against things that happen there, they've taken a very soft approach and a very alternative approach that they normally would in certain cases when things like this have been committed with the same magnitude if it was other countries and other players. So it's very confusing. It's very confusing, but I'll insist, just as I insisted the last time we were having this conversation, as much as we're seeking for restorative justice, and that is to try to restore and to address the harm that was caused without necessarily having to bring anybody to book. But the most important collateral, not even collateral, the victims and the people who suffered in this 2-year war, which are the people I think they must be considered in this, whatever it is, whatever strategy you're choosing to deal with this, these people must be considered. And those who went through these horrific experiences, who were still traumatized, and the kind of losses they went through, not just losing their material things, but also losing their loved ones. People are being murdered, heads were being chopped in front of their loved ones, and there are people who really witnessed these things. So we need to find ways of also addressing these harms, these hurts, these traumas. Otherwise, we will be postponing another war that is most likely happening, and maybe for the generation that experienced this, if this is not handled properly, this is trauma, and this is a history that will be passed down along. And so many, many years later, you'll have a generation which will be like, at some point our people suffered. So if they get a chance to even get back to the helm of leadership of that country, it might not be very good. So that's why, as much as you've chosen to take this route and you've fought every other means of accountability, and you seem to have chosen this restorative justice strategy as a means of conflict resolution, then now you have to address the human aspect of it. People who felt hurt, people who went through that horrific experience, they must feel as if their voice have been heard, even if the people who they know did that are not taken to court or jailed or whatever. But they must feel like their voices have been heard, and the government understands, or the other players, because it's not just the government who was committing this. The TPLF also committed this, the Amara, the Eritrean forces, who the African Union is not even talking about. The Eritrean forces committed these atrocities, and they just crawled back. I don't know if they've crawled back to Eritrea, or they're still, because the latest we were hearing a few weeks ago, they were still in some parts of Tigray region. So I don't know if Isaias Afwerki has taken back his soldiers, because there have been numerous reports that have indicated there are proofs that they are there. So they were there, and they were fighting alongside the government forces. And the African Union has not even reprimanded Eritrea over that. It's not even talking about it. So it's quite something. How this has been handled is really quite something. And as much as you're seeking for peace and all that, peace without justice, that is not the way to go. And of course, justice might not always mean people being jailed and others being taken up by a firing squad. Not at all. You could still find justice and closure for people who feel they need it. So we have to look at the people who suffered and see how can we best address their heart, how can we best make sure that they're able to find closures, and how can we best make them know that we really hear them. We hear them, and we acknowledge the hurt that was done to them, so that Ethiopia can truly heal itself and reconcile with itself and build moving forward for prosperity. So if that part of the human collateral is not handled well, so everything else will amount to nothing, and that will be proved many years to come if that is not properly handled right now. That is just my thoughts based on the experiences we've had and case studies around the world. Now, okay, I'll not talk so much about that story of Senegal. I think we've over-talked about it, but okay, the latest is that the opposition leader has received a suspended prison sentence for libel. Why don't you make him pay? Were there no options? Because usually you could have a prison sentence, or maybe you could be given a bail, like a fine to pay, usually in libel cases. But I guess the government was just interested in just indicting him and taking him to jail. But so now that means he can actually run against the next year if he chooses to. Of course, he will run. Yeah, and I think he's one of the formidable competitors that are giving President Macky Sall. That's why he's working overtime to ensure that he does not find his way to the ballot. But the amount of support that he has from the people, I think this is something that also should worry Macky Sall, and how they keep handling this case of Osman Sonko. I think it's something that they should look at moving forward, because It has been a running battles the last 2 years between the government and, Osman Sonko's supporters. Every time they take it, they drag him to jail. His supporters are there with him. In fact, they start protesting a day on the eve of the court case. Then he goes to court. He's there. They are there with him. And then the day after, you still find them protesting. So the amount of support that he's getting, and especially from the urban youth who are tired by the government of President Macky Sall, because they feel the president of Macky Sall is not really addressing the issues that are really plaguing the young people in Senegal. And so sort of the messaging and the branding of opposition leader Osman Sonko seems to be resonating very well with majority of the youth in Senegal. So plus they don't have work, so it does not matter what day of the week it is, be it a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, they're there. So this is also something else that we should be looking at when we are looking at these demonstrations, because for you to have all these millions and perhaps thousands, hundreds of thousands of youth every other day of the week with you, and then that underscores the lack of joblessness that the youth there especially are complaining about. That's why they have time and they're available to any beckon that has been made by their leader. It does not matter if it's Monday, 5:30 in the morning, they're there because they don't have works to go to. So maybe that is something that should worry a lot of our African leaders. If you really don't take care of the affairs of the youth, then they get that one person that seems to hold their visions and their hope, that seems to represent their hope. And the government of the day does not seem to do what one it promised to do. You should be very wary. And if you run on a platform of transforming the lives of young people, and then you get in there and you change tune and you forget, and then somebody else comes up who seems to revive that hope in them and seems to carry that hope for them, that's a problem for you, and you should get very worried. So that is what has been happening in Senegal. So he received a 2-month suspended prison sentence. So he was found guilty, but they're saying, we can't put you to jail. They couldn't. Otherwise, Senegal will go up in flames. And President Macky Sall, it's now looking bad, As much as these weaponizations of institutions, is something that is very rampant in this continent and has to stop. We can't weaponize our judiciary. We can't weaponize our police force. We can't weaponize institutions like that. We're messing up our countries. The countries in the West, look at the protests that have been ongoing in France. Have you seen those protests? They have been bloody. They have been violent. They have been horrible. Have you seen the protest? They will make those ones that goes on here in Nairobi and those ones that goes on in Dakar a joke. The protests that are the running battles and the violent protests that have been going on in Paris is something else. But you see, the difference is that in that country, the institutions are not used. I want to believe are not used by anybody. The police are just reacting to the violence that they're getting from the protesters, because they're very violent protests that have been ongoing in Paris for weeks ongoing. But even in the rest of the Western countries, you can hardly see that, these institutions are being weaponized towards to meet a political goal. So that is what is happening in Senegal, and it is unfortunate. And the more they do that, the more this guy is able to have a appeal of pity. It's just one of the, in logic and critical thinking, it is considered as one of the fallacies, appeal to pity. So you are just making him popular, and people will just pity him more, especially the young, and they're feeling, oh, poor this person that is not in power, that is being demonized, and the government is unfair. So we have to fight for this person because it seems to be carrying our hope. So that appeal for pity is a thing, and that is how even President Macky Sall himself got to power. When President Abdoulaye Wade, I was explaining to you, also was doing the same to him. So he was able to take that pity and appeal to his supporters, and that got him there. So he's doing the opposite. As much as you're trying to fight him not to be elected, or not, you just creating a very strong opposition figure for you, and you're just making people even pity him more, and just so he will get a lot of pity votes, even for those who might not even be in support of his agenda. But they'll be like, this person has suffered enough. This person, he has really experienced a lot of unfairness from this government. So what we need to do now is send Macky Sall home. As much as I don't even know what this Osman Sonko stands for, but I'll just vote him. I'll just vote him because I feel bad for him. I feel sorry for him. So that appeal of pity might translate into votes, and President Macky Sall, you'll have yourself to blame, okay? So if you can take that advice, it'll be good for you. Anyway, all right. Now, this news from the Catholic Church. I have a lot to say about it, but I will not do that today. I'll just go through it quickly, in 4 minutes, and then we'll just end the show. The Catholic Church has formally rejected a 15th century doctrine of discovery used to justify European colonization of Africa and the Americas. The 15th century, there was something called the Catholic States. I don't know if I've talked to you about it here. And that led to a bloody war from the Catholic states, the states that were being controlled by the Catholic Church, and then other states that were tired of how the Catholic Church was controlling. Especially this was around Europe, because international relations, the idea of states came from Europe, and that's why a lot of international studies and all these things and international system, it's very much Eurocentric, because it is the motherboard of all these things, right? So this war went on for 30 years. It is called the 30-Year War, that ended in 1648 after the signing of the Westphalian Peace Treaty. It was a religious war that took also another political twist, so it became very complicated. So many people died, many lives were claimed, because the Protestants who were protesting against Catholic, and that's how the Protestant Church was born. They're protesting against the Catholic state and how it was ruling. And the Catholic Church was very corrupt, okay, at that time. So, and how it was, and very brutal, even in its leadership. So this is in the 15th century. So apparently there are some documents that have now come out, that have surfaced, that indicates that in the 15th century, this doctrine by the Catholic Church was the motherboard, was the start for colonialism. And so the Catholic Church, the Vatican, is now rejecting this doctrine that during this time and how it was running its affair, that justified colonialism. This is debatable, but if you went back to that century, what I'm explaining now. So after that fighting, and then the end of that war through the signing of the Westphalian Peace Treaty in 1648. So that is when the idea of states were born, by the way. So the idea of states were born. So if you spoke German, you stayed within Germany. If you spoke Polish, you stayed within that country. But you see, in Africa, they mixed it out. They did the mixing and the matching. So the mixing and the matching has never worked very well for us, because we were just brought together, all these tribes brought together. They did not care about the cultural background, the religious background, the whatever practice. They decided you're Africans, because they were dividing the continent according to their needs and according to the agreement they've had as colonialists. And that happened in Germany from, when was that, from 1845 to 1849, around there, I think around that time. But this is what set up that, because after that, Europeans decided, now we can't fight against ourselves. Now that the principles of statehood has been found after the signing of the Westphalian state and sovereignty. That was the beginning of sovereign state after they signed, where you can't invade another state, you can't all those things that we know the states to be, the modern states to be today. That was the foundation of the principles of statehood, the signing of the Westphalian Peace Treaty. But after that, they decided we should not be fighting amongst ourselves. So now let's go discover and see what else is out there in this universe. And that's why I think Dr. Matsanga talks about this very much, and he gets upset every time we hear this white person discovered Lake Victoria, this white person discovered. These things were there. So these are the things that now the Catholic Church is speaking about through this doctrine of discovery, that these white people, explorers, came and discovered Africa. Like, what do you mean discovered Africa? And now we have to read it through history. So-and-so discovered this lake. So-and-so discovered this mountain. Get out of here. So these are things that set up Africa for colonialism. The Catholic Church played a role, but they're saying now, no, that is not the case. So the doctrine, the doctrine of discovery, which is based on decrees set out on the so-called papal bulls, was legally invoked by Europeans who discovered new lands and often violently seized it from the indigenous people. Okay? But in a statement on Thursday, that was yesterday, the Vatican said the doctrine was not part of the teaching of the Catholic Church, even as it still informs current state policies and laws. There's a very close link between the church and colonialism, and there's no way you can divorce these two. The church had to come first, and they discovered all these things and all that. And then, of course, they came with the Bible and the good news. So the approach is very soft. And in some cases, in some indigenous societies, they were not received nicely, because there are some Africans who strongly believed in their traditional practices, and they did not want to receive this white man's religious doctrine. And so there are instances that they were very hostile. So in those cases, that's when they brought in the army part of it to protect them while they spread out this good news. So you see, so separating colonialism and Christianity, be it Catholic, Anglican, and these two churches played a huge role in the spread of colonization, especially in the African society. So you cannot separate them. The church aided in the spread of colonialism. It aided. Go check, even here in Kenya, where we had these early churches, spread around the central part of Kenya. That is where the colonialists went and got a lot of land from those areas, set up camps. You'll find a lot of, the early schools that were set up, a lot of them in central Kenya and other areas, and the churches are there. And those are the areas that the colonialists went and gotten land, because these colonialists, the other side of it, they protected these missionaries who sometimes, as I have explained, were local, the locals there, or the indigenous people there, were being a bit hostile because of the force. They're being forced to change their way of life. They're being forced to change their way of worship and the way they've known things. So it's not that all communities were open to this new change. And so they used the strong-handedness of this army side to protect them. And before you know it, the colonialists were here. So the Christian or the religion was used to pacify Christians, to not see the white man as the problem, to see the white man as a savior who is here to just civilize us. Although at that time, I don't think our forefathers knew what that meant. But this Catholic Church and Anglican Church, and I don't know which other church, they were the start of, in the name of exploring, in the name of whatever it is that they were doing. They aided the colonial masters. They aided the spread of colonialism. So they have to come out and repent, refuting history. History is there for us to read. And we can look back and see today and know what happened. I'm glad it was recorded. But you can't separate. You can't separate from that. Catholic Church, It is after that bloody 30-year war that slowly led to the rest of Europe trying to find other areas they can exert their influence. And, the rest of us just happened to be it. So you can't separate the history of the Catholic Church, of the history of Anglican Church and colonialism and how it helped in spreading colonialism around the world. You can't. And because the generation and the leadership that is there today was not there then, the least you can do is apologize on behalf of the church and take up responsibility where you can take up responsibility, because you can't really change history. History is there. You can only look at it, learn from it, and move forward. So for you to not acknowledge that, I think it's not good. That does not look good for you, because the history is there for all of us to see really what happened. So now the Catholic Church is saying, we don't agree with that doctrine of discovery. The Vatican said the Catholic Church was acknowledging that the papal edict did not reflect the equal dignity and rights of indigenous people. So they're acknowledging that, because Africans were not treated, especially Africans or other areas they went where there are indigenous people, were not treated as human beings. Okay, and that's why they felt we were so backward, we were so ape-like, or whatever it is. So it was their duty to come and change us, and that change came through violence. That change came through brutality, and that is the truth. That is the history. That is the history. So it is acknowledging that the papal edict, as much as did not reflect the equal dignity and the rights of the indigenous people. So what is that? That is the hallmark of colonialism. So you can't acknowledge that and then not acknowledge the part that Catholic Church played in the spread of colonialism. It said that it was aware of the documents, that the documents are manipulated for political processes by colonial powers to justify immoral acts. It also said these were at times done without opposition from ecclesiastical authorities. So what it's saying is, as much as some of these doctrines were manipulated, but also the leadership of the church, the ecclesiastical, the leadership of the church did not do anything. So if the leadership of the church did not do anything while these politicians were manipulating this, that means the leadership of the church was complacent and was in agreement of these changes and what was being done to aid in allowing them to go and practice colonialism freely. It only just to recognize these errors, acknowledge the terrible effects of the assimilation policies and the pain experienced by the indigenous peoples, and ask for pardon. Then you should ask for forgiveness without making too much excuses. That's what you should do, and take responsibility for the part the church played. Okay, that is how you seek for forgiveness, not through excuses, not through trying to change history. We all know what that history says, and that history still, especially in the continent, has stained. It's just it is a stain in our history, and a lot of these things that were done has really hampered and has really affected this continent in so many ways that somebody cannot downplay the effects of colonialism and the part that the church played in aiding it. I mean, the least you can do is acknowledge and then do better moving forward. Catholic Church and other actors. Okay, now that has made me feel a certain way, so I think it will be a good time to just put a stop and to thank you so much. Sorry, I'm choking. Not because of that. I want to thank you so much for your time. It is what time is it? About 33 minutes past 10 noon here in Nairobi. It is on a Friday, so we will see you here back on Sunday. I hope you have yourselves a wonderful weekend. My name is Miriam Ogoto. Thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.
Thank you.